looking at different places and showing you different things from the presentation. So I'll be kind of referring to it from time to time, but the order that we look at things will be the order that we see them as we move. So first thing to talk about here is sedimentation. So you'll remember that from the presentation. Rivers move across the landscape, across their floodplain. One of the reasons is because they erode. The other reason is sedimentation. So they're putting down sediment over time. So where I'm standing here and where I dug down a little bit, that is where the cycling walking path used to be. So that's concrete down there, asphalt down there. So this used to be the level of the land right here. Okay? So a couple of recent storm events, and we've got all the sedimentation here. Where Billy is sitting, this is kind of the new level of land here. So since this was built, since those big floods in 11 and 14, we've had a considerable amount of new sediment placed on where we're sitting here, to the point that that path has recently been rebuilt at a much higher level because it kept flooding all the time. So as you look through here, the areas that you're looking at, we have some nice new soil here that's been put down by all those layers of sedimentation. And you can kind of tell, to keep the path open, the city has had to dig it. So we have a little bit of a trench here. That trench never used to be here. It's just because that's where all the new sediment has been deposited. And we're talking here in the last 10 to 15 years. So this isn't geologic time we're referring to. This is relatively recent history. Okay, like I said, don't get too comfortable because we're moving again.
Oh, okay. Then it's done.
So this is sort of the most of the trench that you can see here. And that's all, relatively recently deposited. So around 2005 or so, in that period, there used to be some really nice biking and hiking trails through here. But with the high water of the last few years, especially since 11, it's pretty much killed out most of the trees. So you're starting to see a little bit of new growth, a bit of recovery here. But all of that high water was pretty hard on the trees, and they're beginning to recover now. But you can see the amount of new material that's been deposited. Okay. So clearly this material came from somewhere, and we're going to talk about erosion here in a moment, but that's that sedimentation process where you can really see how much it does develop. All right, we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the bank. So I'm going to get you to follow me. We're going to make a path through here. Hopefully nobody steals this. Let's look at this as a water deposition here. We're going to look at that here.
I'll make my own trail.
Make your own trail. This is the problem with the first group. By the fourth group, we've really hammered down a nice trail through here. If you can come in a little farther, please. But don't, sorry, but don't step there.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, good.
Okay, so welcome to our little place in the bush here. As you're moving through, we can still see some signs of a high water. So this was not put here because it sort of grew and flopped over and died there. That is some material that would have been deposited by water. So that gives you a sense of how high the water has to be in here in order to start depositing the grass on a tree like that. As we move through here, I'll try to point out other places where we see that, but that gives us a sign of what the high water was like here. Okay, so we would at this point be in at least ankle deep water right here. Okay. Oh, and right behind me there's much more right here.
So that's how you plant. Oh, it just fell apart.
Oh, thank you. I would have missed that in about a minute. I never found it. Thank you.
My buddy went out and bought like we went up north.
Okay, get to where you can see and hear me here. So, I deliberately took us through some rough terrain here to sort of illustrate the point of how the vegetation has fallen down here. The trees and such are decaying and falling. But that's the stuff that we refer to as coarse woody debris. And it's this coarse woody debris when it's along the banks here or in the water that provides us a lot of good ecological service. What that coarse woody debris does is it slows down the movement of water, and when the water slows down, then you have sedimentation that begins. So you'll see around where those gentlemen are standing, yes, they're standing on the coarse woody debris, but there's a lot of sediment underneath it. That's the stuff that's been trapped. So it's taken out of the riverbank itself. So any nutrients or contaminants that might be traveling with it are also kept there, kept out of the water system. It also will strengthen the bank. So we don't need to have rock and concrete here to protect the banks. We can use natural vegetation just as well. Again, it slows down the water, but it also acts as bank armor. Not as good as rock or concrete, but an awful lot less expensive. All you have to do is not remove it, and it will perform its service. And it's areas like this that act as a source for all that material. So when we have our next set of floods, which inevitably will happen, this material here that's starting to break as we sit on it is going to be the stuff that floats downstream and armors a bank somewhere else. Okay, so it's really important that we maintain these natural areas like this and kind of avoid the reflex to come in here and clean it up and make it look pretty, because these are sources of debris that will help us prevent erosion downstream. Okay. So we're going to head out now, and we're going to meet again kind of on the riverbank underneath the bridge. So let me lead the path here, and we'll see what we can find as a better way out.
That's behind me, I'll trip.
Charlie, identify that plant.
Whoa! Is that one?
Yeah, the one with the big leaves.
No, funky looking. That's sandals.
Trailblazer. Those sandals are good.
Sandals gonna get
All
stick right
terrain
in
mode.
toe.
Here we had ants attacking us.
Yep.
Turtle people. Giving them the all
Where the
terrain.
people are built different.
Go back to my
Oh my god, if this camera gets me dipping it, I'm gonna be so mad.
That's why he brought it, so he can catch people falling.
Exactly.
Smart call. We should put no call on our
Oh my God.
We were just talking about how our mom is so ridiculous.
What? It's a dead branch. It wouldn't do that.
Aiden Iverson in his natural habitat.
That's what.
He tried pulling it back.
That's what.
I'm not intended.
Nope. You said pun intended. You said pun intended a little late.
Hey, look, I found a soda. Take a pop. Thank you. I can't remember what they're called. Metal. You couldn't remember what
That's I think.
I don't either, but the label was right on the side. I just saw pop. Holding on to you.
That's a nice thing in metal. You like to touch it?
Okay, I'm going down.
Where? I'm gonna ask this new question to my kids. Where the hell did the bees go in there?
Where they came.
Inside our
Okay, so they're not there.
no.
Are you still working there?
Not right now.
I'm too tall, yet not tall enough to just...
Is my backpack?
Yep.
Yep.
Maybe the tree really small.
Yeah, it can. Has enzymes in it.
Sacrifice the crop.
Catch anybody falling?
Sadly not. But.
Okay, if I can get you to assemble over here, please. So we looked a little bit at sedimentation. We've looked a little bit at coarse woody debris and the source for that debris and what the bank looks like. Now let's talk about the conditions when things change here. So when I talk about river dynamics, I'm talking about where the stream channel moves over time. So between erosion and sedimentation, like mentioned in the presentation, the river itself will move. So here, anywhere between the banks of the valley itself, the river has been moving through this area since glaciation. Okay, so from the boulevard there, past on the other side, past Co-op Feeds, at some point the river channel has been there. The time that the river moves is when it's in flood, and the bigger the flood, the more opportunity for movement. So on the bridge support there, you can see marked the level of floods of different severity. So from a 1 in 5 year flood up to a 1 in 100 year flood. So in 11 and 14, it was at or beyond the 1 in 100 year flood level. So you can see at that point, we would be underwater here, right? Water would be over my head. I wouldn't be standing because the water was moving pretty quickly at that time. But it gives you a sense of the depth of the water then. When you've got that much water moving, that's when you have all of your stream energy, and that's when the river starts to move, and when you see changes. Oh. Yeah, if I can get people just to hold the corner there, what can we learn from these flood events? So this was taken at a flood event. I think this was 11 here. So you can see the bridge, you can see it, but the ends of it would be underwater. But we can tell some other interesting things from this. You can see places where we're likely to find changes in the riverbank. So here, or right there, this is an area where we would expect to see the river potentially cutting over time. But because it still has that strong protection there, all of those trees, it's resisting erosion. Over here, we can see where some former stream channels were. And as you start to look, you can see more and more of these scars, these places where channels used to be. So this whole area in here at one point would have been part of the river bottom. It just moves over time. So this is the river dynamics part I speak of. Unfortunately for people, or as people who build and develop things, that gets in the way. So here we have a nice highway that we want to travel like this. Of course, we have to have a little bend in it, but we have ongoing erosion here. So it's the sort of thing that we have to be concerned with over time. If we continue to put large amounts of money into it, we can resist that, but we have to choose our battles there. It's difficult to armor the whole riverbank. So this is a little bit more of a close-up here. This is the golf course down on the river in that direction, right on the banks of the river itself. Kern Park up over here, north is toward me. So what are some sites here of interest as far as river dynamics go? What are some things here you can point out? Yes, so that's one, some things here too. So this is a little bit of old photography. I took my kayak down here this summer, and this doesn't exist anymore. Okay, the water now flows like this. So this,
like an island?
well, it's in the process of becoming an oxbow lake.
Okay.
At the moment, it is kind of an island, though, right? The water is extremely shallow right here. I kept hitting bottom, so the new river bank is beginning to build up in that area. Other interesting things we can see here. So here we have an old river channel. That's where the river used to be, but it isn't anymore. The river now travels in this direction. Okay. We have an old oxbow here. You can see just because some of the changes in soil here, it's still quite evident. And probably some more stuff going on here in the golf course itself, although because it's fairly manicured, it kind of gets changed over time. And then we have another old river channel here. So again, illustrating where it used to be and some of that dynamic nature of it. So here's the golf course, and now we're going a little bit farther to the west. What do we see here for features, oxbow lakes, former channels, that sort of thing? We got that channel there that we saw before, but yeah, there it is. Sorry.
This one?
Yeah, we got lots of oxbows here. Okay. So we went down Grand Valley Road. There at one point is class, and to the south of us, couldn't really see it very much, but now you can. You can see where some of those old features were. Old features are where the river used to be. So, you know, everywhere between here and here, at some point, the river has been through there. Okay. So really fertile land, but land that gives us some problems sometimes. Okay, so I'm getting too old for this. We're going to go up on the bridge, actually right about where we took those water samples before, so I'll meet you right up there. Wants to get out of the lab today?
Yeah, I would have just usually been in my office, but
A little variety then.
yeah. Yeah, when Baljeet said we were using a GoPro for like 4 sessions, I thought he meant like through fields.
Well, the others will be a little different than this, but
Well, I mean like when we like regularly go to like a potato field or
right.
the soybean field or the Solpoise Pulse.
Wasn't what you expected then.
No. Oh, well, that's relaxing.
Yeah, good.
It's like a nature trail almost.
Well, this one is, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do you go kayaking here?
Yeah.
Where do you get on?
Usually at Dinsdale.
Okay.
That's the dock there. All right, so we're going to look in this direction here first. So, erosion. You can see the cut bank here quite clearly where it's all beginning to erode away. We can see, especially over there, about where we hiked to, all of the coarse woody debris on the bank. And those are the places where we don't see as much erosion. It's protected there, at least to some degree. So this is the part where erosion is happening, and the bank over time will continue to move in that direction. Will get eroded away. So there is some armoring and protection up there because of all the trees, so that's good. But, you know, rivers are powerful. As we have more floods and those trees begin to decay, they won't be able to resist it. And inevitably the river is going to cut through there. It'll be a while, but as you can see, the erosion is continuing. Okay. All right, a little farther.
Have yourself a tree. Yeah. I just cut the tree above it. I cut the tree down and then look right above his head. And then like, alright, cut the tree down and pick the tree within behind it. Oh, like, yeah, sure. I know, like, people look after things their home, but it's like, why do people take the tree? I know. It's like, take it a little far. Yeah, exactly. Well, and like, saving the like, if you actually see, like, what do you look at? And by law, they have to, once they're done, they have to make it look like it was beheld. Have you seen the stats on Whalesville? Exactly. Well, like, the pipelines are these. Yeah, Quebec is so against the pipelines, but they just transfer the road by ship. Yeah. We're talking about. I think we're probably the worst What's the environment?
What are you doing?
I don't think there's dogwood.
Dogwood?
Hey, look, somebody had a good time here.
Wow, mine goes through
There should be audio on the camera.
Okay, I was just gonna ask.
Yeah, it's the Hero Black 8.
Just sleep. Because my Hero 3 has audio. Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so if we have erosion happening on that bank, which we can see from another perspective here, what's going on this side?
It's slower on this side.
So it's slower on this side. So what happens to the particles as they move here?
Gets deposited.
They settle, right? This is where we have sedimentation, and this is where we have a building process. So over time, this part of the river moves in this direction, just like that part is. So the river itself doesn't get bigger, it just moves. I mean, sometimes it gets a little bigger and then sediments in. The process doesn't go in lockstep, but over time, as long as you don't change the flow, the river itself will stay fairly consistent. So in the areas where it's recently been exposed, we have some of our first disturbance species coming in. So the species we usually would refer to as weeds. So they're weeds because they're really good at moving into bare soil. So in an ag situation, bare soil is a lot of what we have, at least at certain times of the year. So considered undesirable. Here, it's good at least stabilizing the soil. All right. So these are some of our first species that move in to begin to stabilize the bank. Then, over a period of years, as it begins to get a little bit stable, a little bit drier, then we have our friend here, the sandbar willow. So this would often be referred to as a sandbar coming in, some description, and you'll often see this willow growing on it. So it's really good at establishing on a new bank, and its root systems are very good at holding this bank together. So there will be some erosion here when the water level comes up a lot, but it will help to hold things together. Okay. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is a little bit more about some of the flooding here. So I'm going to get you to gather around a bit, and we're going to look at what some floods have looked like here in the last few years. So 2011 was one of our big flood years, but it was kind of normal in a way. It was normal because our flood peak here maxed out in spring at about 1,000 meters per second, but it came at a time of year where we sort of expect that. So water levels were extremely high here. This area here would all be underwater, but that water came down in spring. 3 years later, we had another flood event, but it was a little bit different. Does anybody recall that and why I would say it was a bit different than the flood we had in 11? Sorry?
It has become a median. Oh, sorry,
No, that's okay. It happened in summer. So there was a big rainstorm event in this part of the world here over the July long weekend. We don't usually get our peak floods in summer. They usually come in spring. So that was somewhat unusual. The magnitude was about the same, a little bit over 1,000 cubic meters per second, but at a different time of year. Okay, so 2009 was not a particularly high flood year, about 100 meters per second, and in spring. This is kind of what we expect, a so-called normal flood. Last year we had a couple of flood peaks, but we had another one in summer, which is again unusual for us. But when I start saying things like, well, we had it unusual here and then we had it unusual again, you should begin to question my credibility on that, because if it's starting to happen a lot, it's no longer unusual. Okay. This year, if you're interested, so this was a dry year, or we consider it to be a dry year here. So our maximum flooding here happened late in the season, and less than 50 cubic meters per second, so quite low. Right now, so this is the amount of water we have moving down. We're actually right at the median. So this is what we would expect for a water level at this time of year. So although it was dry earlier in the season, we're not going into winter in particularly bad shape, although the soils are not particularly good. There at least is a little bit of water in the rivers. Okay. Over time, because we seem to be getting more of these summer flood events, I'm not sure if this is the beginning of signs of climate change on the prairies. Certainly the modelers tell us we will begin to expect more severe rain events. And if so, we may end up having more of our floods in summer instead of in spring. Okay. That is about all I wanted to cover here, just to give you a sense of the changes that happen here on the landscape. The fact that these rivers are always going to be moving, and the time they move is when we have those flood events. When the river is at this level here, it's pretty stable. There's not a lot of erosion going on that bank. It's when it's up over my head, that's when things start to change. Okay, so I pointed out where Belgique will be, so you can head back in that direction. Please don't swim, that's what the bridge is for. And
What?
I mean for everyone to look.
What are you looking at?
That hole.
Oh.
Muskrat or beaver hole? No, it wouldn't be a beaver, it'd be
No,
muskrat.
there's tons of beavers along here,
Beavs do make
but I
holes
think
like
you're
that
right.
sometimes.
And then also you'll see a lot of bank swallows. So lots of good habitat here too. I will see you in the class on Tuesday.
Wait, and we're going to the Brookfield.
We'll meet at the cafeteria and then we'll head out from there.
Thank you. Thanks, Mom.
Well, last time